Number 10, Bloodstorm. Now, Storm is already mistress of the elements, so quite powerful and quite interesting. But what happens when she becomes a vampire? Now, this has happened briefly in main continuity, but in the Mutant X universe, it became a permanent change. The Mutant X comic series was published from 1998 to 2001, and as mentioned, it saw a very different Storm. This was after she was bitten by Dracula. Here, she was not saved, but instead became a full-fledged creature of the night. She, of course, had vows not to kill, so she had the vampire dilemma, which she solved by hiring some of her former teammates to let her drink from them, like Kitty Pryde. She would eventually leave the X-Men and join a team called the Six. She also turns Gambit into a vampire, even though she warns him he'll regret it, and he does. Spoilers. Listen when people warn you. Bloodstorm became a breakout character of this series. Number 9, New Sun Gambit. Speaking of Gambit, let's take a look at one of his alternate versions. This is New Sun Gambit, and he hails from Earth 9921. Gambit actually has enormous power potential that was quashed by Mr. Sinister in the main continuity, but that continuity is not all. In this other universe, he was trained to use his abilities even before he had them, and then when this was combined with his full potential and a mystic ceremony, he became something else altogether. The only thing is, the awakening of all these abilities would create a shockwave that would destroy his Earth, forcing him to travel around, and of course he ended up on the 616 Earth, where he ended up befriending Gambit and trying to help him along his way, but didn't tell him who he was. It was after his reveal and Gambit's subsequent disgust that he changed his name to New Sun. Some fans like seeing the full unleashed potential on display of Gambit. Number 8, Basilisk. Not all alternate versions that people like have happy outcomes. Case in point, Basilisk from Earth 11326, an Earth also known as Age of X. Here, Cyclops was incarcerated in a mutants-only facility after the manifestation of his powers as a teenager killed several people, including his parents. He captured the attention of the prison warden Arcade because of his power set, so he made him this very special mask. It looks a lot like the Skull mask from Persona 5, and it's something that people like about this character. In fact, for many, it's what makes him cooler. It is a very menacing looking mask. Now, a lot of this universe had to do with Legion, one of its personalities, and manifesting another world. So for some, it was just a cool concept in general. The mask looked great. Loved the mask. Number 7, Soldier Supreme. Here we have an amalgamated character from Warp World. This was the universe that was created when Gamora had the Infinity Gauntlet, put everybody's souls into the Soul Gem, and then folded that universe in half. As a result of this, the characters were merged and fused together. So you have Marvel characters smushed, and one of those was Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Doctor Strange, Stephen Strange. So I mean, they kind of already had the same name, just spelled differently, so it made it a bit easier. Back there, Dr. Stephen Rogers, but now with a PH. Their stories actually don't fuse too badly. It's World War II, and Stephen Rogers is contracted for a super secret soldier experiment, only it turns out it's a cover for a mystical ceremony instead of for, you know, the scientific one that he actually undergoes. But these mystic rituals still end up enhancing his strength and allowing him to connect with the occult, and he becomes Soldier Supreme. So he has Cap's cowl, but he still has like a mustache. And he was actually one of the heroes who objected to Warp World being completely destroyed at the end of the arc by Adam Warlock. So Warlock found a way to let it still exist and let these characters still exist. It was one of those loopholes. Stephen Rogers did that and kept being a hero. Number 6, Old Man Logan. Would any of our nerd lists be complete without mentioning Old Man Logan? Yes, they would, but it just keeps coming up. It's a staple here on Top 10 Nerd. Well, this story is one of the most popular alternate universe stories out there, and it has a famously gross confrontation between the Hulk and Wolverine, or Logan, because he's not Wolverine anymore in this story. Here we have a grizzled old man Logan fighting his way across a supervillain-controlled America, trying to keep his claws sheathed after what he did, which, spoilers, was somehow managing to kill most of the X-Men. This was because he fell for an illusion created by Mysterio. This is a must-read for many fans and a fave Wolverine story for others. Number 5, X-Apes. The X-Men are monkeys, or rather apes. This, funnily enough, spawned off of the Marvel Zombies universe and event. Basically, they're trying anything. That event was just so popular. This did not turn out to be quite the hit that was, but I mean, few things can. But this universe still has its fans. Actually, everybody in this universe are apes or monkeys or animals of some kind. So really, if you enjoy this concept, it's just the whole universe, and you have people like the Ape Avengers and Dr. Octopus. It's made for a certain type of pun-loving individual. It's a bit niche, but for some it sparks joy. Number 4, Witch Breed. For this we have to go for Neil Gaiman of Sandman fame's 1602 Marvel Comics contribution. It is also an alternate universe story. In this universe, the Marvel universe is all happening by in Elizabethan times, 1602. Their mutants exist, but they are known as Witch Breed. This is because they are thought to be the spawn of demons or witches. Or both. They are creatures to be hunted down, but they find safe haven in Xavier's Select College for Sons of Gentlefolk, a school that causes great concern for Sir Nicholas Fury because he sees the potential of all of these students as soldiers, which, let's not lie, that's part of what Xavier is doing. Again, this is a universe where people tend to like the whole thing, but the X-Men stand out as a distinct part, or rather, the Witch Breed. Number 3, X-Babies. Versions of your favorite characters as babies or kids. This is a concept that is either really fun or incredibly lame, depending upon who you're talking to. So the X-Babies are clones created by Mojo in the Mojoverse. This was probably inspired by an even earlier story where he had just taken the X-Men and turned them into kids, again for entertainment. Because you know, if anything goes on long enough, be it show, series, whatever, you're gonna get two things. You're gonna get a child episode and you're gonna get a musical episode. Now the X-Babies are a concept that is short-lived, but they are usually returned to. There is even an A-Babies versus X-Babies. Again, how cool you'll find these tots depends upon your tolerance for baby-related shenanigans. Number 2, Earth X. The version of the X-Men here are depressing, but all of Earth X is depressing actually. After an experiment of Reed Richards goes wrong, or seemingly that's what happened, for once it's not Reed's fault, I know, shock and awe, a population of superpowered beings is produced all over the Earth, and the world drastically alters. To quote The Incredibles, when everyone's super, no one is. Suddenly there's not as much of a reason to hate and fear the X-Men, and they've largely fallen apart. The one character people tend to remember the most that sticks out when they first think of this is Wolverine, who's got a beer gut and is married to Jean Grey, except it's not Jean, it's Madeline Pryor, but he keeps calling her Jean, and it's just sad. Now, how exactly is this cooler, you may be asking? Well, it's all in the depiction. It's unique, it's memorable, and part of a well-received work. So for many, that's what makes it cool. And finally, in at number 1, Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. If you thought people loved Vampire Storm, then you know that they enjoy Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine has been a vampire more than once. You have what-if stories like the aforementioned Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. But you also have arcs like Curse of the Mutants, which would also be the arc that left Jubilee as a vampire for a bit. Many have fond memories of the What If story, where upon successfully turning Storm, Dracula then turns all the rest of the X-Men. Only because of Wolverine's healing factor, he figures out how to use his powers way faster than everybody else, and so he dethrones Dracula and takes over as leader of the vampires. In fact, he leads the new vampire X-Men to take over New York. It's up to the bizarre combination of Doctor Strange and the Punisher to take him down.
And at number 10, Mutant X Storm. Mutant X Storm is a mutant vampire. She goes by the name Bloodstorm. Classic. After being captured by Dracula, who wanted her as one of his brides, Storm is turned into a vampire. She gets her revenge though, aiding the X-Men in defeating Dracula, although she felt it was only right for her to leave the team now that she was infected with vampirism. Vampirism? Vampirism. And you know, bloodlust and what have you. Kinda would be problematic if you're trying to work on a team and you just keep trying to bite your peers. Imagine that wouldn't go over well. Later on, she would cross paths with Gambit, who pleaded with her to turn him into a vampire. So she agreed and she sired him, something that he would later resent her for in the long run. Moving on to number 9, Dark Claw. Dark Claw is the amalgamation of Batman and Wolverine from the Amalgam universe. So why is he scary and not just like totally freaking awesome? Well, just look at him. Debuting back in 1966, this character was a meta-mutant detective whose origin story is a combination between the two iconic characters' own beginnings. Logan Wayne witnessed his parents' murders as a child. When he grew up, he would join the Air Force and eventually was transferred to the Weapon X program. This is where he gains his Wolverine abilities, his adamantium-laced skeleton, and a supercharged increase in strength. Deemed a failure by those conducting the Weapon X program, he ended up going back home to New Gotham City and became Dark Claw. roaming the streets as a vigilante fighting crime. And at number 8, Storm Phoenix. Coming at you from What If Volume 2 Issue 79, this alternate version of Storm is a version that had the power of the Phoenix rather than Jean Grey. The Phoenix Force possesses her after a mission in space with the X-Men. When she comes back to Earth, she ends up creating a worldwide organization to protect the environment. Seems noble, right? But, you know, she takes a little too far. Instead of it just being a regular altruistic organization, Storm openly harms those opposed to her ideals, suspending them in animation up in the Earth's atmosphere, which you gotta admit is actually kind of a funny way to, you know, be like, you to somebody. Suspend you up in the air. She ends up freezing an entire community after they violate an anti-hunting agreement. Eventually Storm Phoenix is defeated thanks to Kitty Pryde phasing into her original body. But all in all, things could have escalated to much darker territory if she hadn't been stopped when she was. Moving on to number 7, the Red Queen. This alternate version of Jean Grey hails from Earth 9575. An alternate reality that's first seen in X-Man issue 5 from 1995. This Jean has been depowered thanks to previous crimes she's committed, and it's a little unclear as to whether or not she had access to the Phoenix Force in the past. Now, having been banished from her own Earth, Earth 998, she decides to reinvent herself by pretending to be a reincarnated version of Queen Madeline Pryor, her clone. From here, she embarks on a quest to become the Queen of Britain and eventually conquer the rest of the planet, and she had a plan to do it and restore her powers by finding various different iterations of Nate Grey from across the multiverse. She would essentially lure them onto her Earth, use them, drain them of their abilities until they died, and then, you know, just grab another one and use him. Eventually she tries this trick on the 616 Nate Grey, who ends up breaking free from her powers, which results in her draining all of the life force of the other Nate Greys in an attempt to defeat the 616 Nate. But eventually Nate creates a sun around her and burns her alive. And fun fact, later on in the 616 continuity, Madeline Pryor would actually begin using the alias of Red Queen. Funny enough. She's like, I'm inspired. Moving on to number 6, Age of Apocalypse Colossus. Colossus of Earth 295 from the Age of Apocalypse Earth is not only frightening, but absolutely tragic. During the Age of Apocalypse event, he was forced out of retirement for a second time. The first was after he was so severely injured that he couldn't transform back into his human form, and was only kept together by Magneto's metal manipulation. The second time though that he came out of retirement was thanks to him needing to go on a very important mission to combat Apocalypse for Magneto. He and his wife Shadowcat led a team of mutants to save Colossus' sister, Illyana, who was the only mutant left alive with reality-traveling powers. In the process of rescuing her, he and Shadowcat abandoned their team, leaving them for dead. When he later learned that the reality that Magneto was trying to save with her powers and his plan was one in which Illyana was dead, he went berserk, going on a rampage that caused the deaths of several mutants, including his own wife. He was eventually killed by Gambit as a last resort in trying to control the mutant. And at number 5, Brute from Mutant X. Beast has had a handful of scary alternate versions, but this one looks like he crawled right out of a creature feature. Here we have Hank McCoy of Earth 1298, the Mutant X Earth, who is known as Brute rather than Beast. Brute came to be thanks to a series of deadly experiments that he conducted on himself, that not only changed him into this aquatic-esque being, which allowed him to breathe underwater, but also reduced his intelligence down to the level of a child in kindergarten. He is later further mutated, gaining hooves for feet. While he may not have his smarts anymore, the character does have a berserker streak, which when unleashed can be fatal for anyone in his way, especially considering his mental temperament. He's a bit of a tragic character as well. He was falsely accused of the murders of Green Goblin and Ben Reilly, and was executed for it. And at number 4, New Sun Gambit. From Earth 9921, we have this insanely powerful and terrifying version of Gambit known as New Sun. New Sun has control of kinetic energy on a molecular level. This means he can turn any object's potential energy into kinetic energy, which in turn makes it explosive. And it's a power without much limitations. He doesn't need to make physical contact with an object to do so, and can even do it to living beings, including humans. His total kinetic control can also stop motion, and he can simulate other kinds of energy with it, manipulating whatever kinetic energy is present in order to simulate energies like infrared energy, all by molecular agitation. In addition to that, dude can transform himself into an energy wave, which allows him to travel through space and into other dimensions. Plus, he's also killed his reality's Phoenix, which is no easy feat. He dies in Gambit Volume 3 issue 23 when he's impaled and then explodes, which also causes his world to explode in the process. And at number 3, X-Men Forever Storm. The X-Men Forever Storm is also known as Perfect Storm and resides on Earth 161. She's a clone of the original Storm who was created in order to restore the powers of heroes who were trapped on Genosha. But the clone became unstable, rapidly aged, and during an incident with the Shadow King absorbed the darker, less friendly aspects of his personality, to say the least. She ended up becoming malevolent and ambushed the X-Men team during a mission. She would then kill Wolverine and betray the the team entirely, fleeing to Wakanda to seek out T'Challa's protection. T'Challa, who had previously been in a relationship with the regular Storm, believed that she was good, and saw that she was making an effort to help the people of Wakanda, changing the weather, helping the innocent, you name it. But eventually, after the two got married, Storm betrayed him too, letting Killmonger into their quarters, who killed the rest of the royal family and T'Challa, all so she could rule Wakanda. Moving on to number 2, the Age of X Cyclops. This Cyclops hails from Earth 11326, an Earth in which anti-mutant propaganda is on the rise, and anti-mutant protests eventually lead to the decimation of mutants by the US government. As you can imagine, Cyclops did not fare well in this socio-political climate. Scott operated under the name Basilisk, and after being captured by the government, his eyelids were removed in order to prevent him from having any sort of control over his optic blasts. He was then forced to wear a mask by the prison he was kept in, and was used by Alcatraz as a mutant executioner. Kinda dark. He eventually managed to escape and managed to save some of the other mutants in the process too, but he's forever haunted by the guilt of what he was forced to do, and the lives of innocent mutants that he ended. And finally, in at number 1, the Ruins Charles Xavier. I feel like anytime Professor X has an alternate that's evil, that particular Earth suffers big time because of it. This version of Charles Xavier comes from 1995's Ruins, one of the most depressing and dark alternate reality stories in the Marvel multiverse. Taking place on Earth 9591, this Charles was elected president of the US rather than creating the X-Men. He ends up becoming corrupted and set out on a political crusade against mutants, despite having Warren Worthington III as one of his security staff, although Warren kept his mutations a secret in general. Xavier creates a prison in Texas for mutants, in which mutants are deformed, experimented on, or tortured as a means of controlling their mutations, something that he states is done for their own good. Yeah, super dark.
Number 10. Troll. The series Youngblood from Image Comics is definitely trolling us with this one. Youngblood is a series about a government-run and endorsed team of superheroes. It explores the idea of a world where superheroes garner celebrity-like status, similar to the series The Boys and X-Statix. The team even includes Vogue, a Russian model who later uses her fame to create a makeup line. Troll is a member who is beast-like in appearance, covered in muscles. Upon seeing him in his true form, one would immediately be forced to call to mind Beast from Marvel's X-Men crew. Because get this, Troll normally is covered in blue fur. Yeah. Though admittedly, he is often seen without it as he shaves his entire body to appear more human. As his name suggests, an actual troll. While also agile and physically strong like Beast, he does not appear to hold the same level of intelligence. Though he once wielded a terrifying weapon, a book that could be used to rewrite one's own history and can tell the future, he lost it in a card game. Wah wah. Someone smaller but just as fierce as the Beast, but with less intellect, sounds pretty scary and dangerous to me. Number 9. House of X and Powers of X. These two new comic series retcon and relaunch X-Men history, and although they operate within the world of Marvel and the world of X-Men themselves, I feel as though they are important to mention. When we talk about comics inspiring people, it is important that we also recognize some of those who were inspired are fortunate enough to do the writing and illustration within the realm of the world that inspired them. How cool is that? When we turn to these new Marvel series, we see at the writing helm Jonathan Hickman, who has brought us a much more daring story when it comes to the familiar motley crew that is the mutant heroes. In fact, he has even reintroduced some heroes that we may have forgotten. The time in which mutants fight for their rights, freedoms, and even for isolation on Krakoa is painted as much more desperate and bleak. Part of this is the beautiful artwork and colors created in combination by R.B. Silva, Pepe Larraz, and Marta Gracia. The writing built up the high stakes, and if you want to feel that tension and see how ruthless these mutants can get, check out House of X's issue number 2. Number 8. Steeljack. Astro City has changed publishers so many times, I'd rather not list them all. Instead, I'll just say the series is currently listed as belonging to Vertigo Comics. More of a concrete jungle vibe, in this series we have different factions or gangs of heroes in the city. The most similar one to the X-Men being the Astro City Irregulars. Among the characters of the series we find Steeljack, a wannabe superhero who acquired the power of metal skin. Sound familiar? Steeljack is like a permanent metal version of Colossus. Originally, this character was actually a villain in the series. I don't know about you, but I would not want to deal with a villainous version of Colossus in any form. Number 7. Sarah Rainmaker. Coming to us from Wildstorm Comics, now owned by DC, is a Storm-inspired hero. Let's spread some of that Storm love. In the Gen 13 series, Sarah Rainmaker is introduced as one of a group of Gen active teens, think mutants, who are invited to participate in government testing. The group is kept in a prison-like testing facility before they escape. Sounds like some creepy X-Men gone wrong scenario where they get successfully rounded up by the government. Sarah Rainmaker's abilities allow her to control weather, only so far as air and water, though she can also fly and create lightning. So we're looking at a character who isn't quite on Storm's power level, but definitely has similar abilities. Other interesting facts are that Sarah Rainmaker identifies as a lesbian, and that her character was originally introduced as a member of the Native American Apache tribe. Number 6. Allison Hargreaves. Coming to us from Dark Horse's Umbrella Academy comic series, which now also has a Netflix show, we have Allison Hargreaves, also known as the Rumor. This story is definitely a much stranger and darker one than X-Men, in terms of the moods and vibes, and was written and created by Gerard Way, lead singer of My Chemical Romance. This connection is a little more loose than some of the others, especially if we are looking for a huge correlation in appearance. However, when it comes to powers and personality, the connection is a strong one, as Allison resembles that of another famed X-Men and Avenger, and one of my favorite superheroes, Scarlet Witch. That is to say, Allison's powers are that she can alter reality, not using chaos magic per se, but by using the phrase, "I heard a rumor." Anything spoken after those words by her that is untrue ultimately becomes true. Scarlet Witch has also famously spoken aloud some of her changes to reality, only to have them come true, though her wishes are not as connected to the need to speak as Allison's are. Beyond that, Allison is also prone to fits of hysteria and emotional outbursts, echoing that of Wanda's struggle with her emotions and her mental health. Number 5. Toyo Harada. One could compare Toyo Harada of Valiant Comics' Harbinger series to Professor Charles Xavier, save that he is evil. Toyo is one of the most powerful psionics in the world. Again, psionics are kinda like mutants. His powers echo that of Professor X, namely that he is an insanely powerful telepath who also has the ability to control minds, but who also possesses the powers of telekinesis. His goal is to recruit others with superpowers and take over the world so that he can protect it and guide humans into the next step towards their evolution. Yeah, spooky. Number 4. Ripclaw. A combination of Warpath and Wolverine, Ripclaw comes to us from Image Comics' Cyberforce team and series. His origin story resembles a horror story and echoes some of Wolverine's origins, which, let's be honest, all of Wolverine's origin story are pretty much terrifying in and of themselves. Namely, when Ripclaw's mystical Apache powers garnered him some attention from the Cyberdata Corporation, they used him to do their bidding as their agent, after brainwashing him and giving him cybernetic enhancements. Ripclaw is also a member of the Native American Apache tribe, like X-Men's Warpath, and oddly enough, also like our number 7, Sarah Rainmaker. He was granted mystic abilities by the spirits of his ancestors to take on animal-like abilities, similar but different than Warpath's Apache shaman spirit abilities, which he used to defeat the Demon Bear. His long black hair and red accents on his outfit also leave him looking similar to Warpath. Number 3. Silver Banshee. What happens when DC maybe gets a little inspiration from Marvel's X-Men member Banshee? We get Silver Banshee, who I actually think is an even cooler character. These two characters are similar in name and abilities only though. Both have supersonic deafening abilities, though Banshee tends to operate on the lower frequency, while Silver Banshee is perceived as operating on a higher frequency. And her sonic death cry is more deadly. If she can see you and knows your name and you hear her, you are dead. Though their names are also quite similar, Silver Banshee is known for being a villain in the DC world, where Banshee, though controlled by villains before, is usually a good guy. While Banshee is also male, while Silver Banshee is female, he did have a daughter who also had similar powers, who went by the name of Siren, before taking up her father's old mantle, Banshee. Though she has never explicitly been an X-Men member, she was one of the original X-Force members. Number 2. Psyblade. Also coming to us from the Cyberforce crew, we have Psyblade, who looks very similar to X-Men's Psylocke. Although Psyblade's powers are described as being electromagnetic while Psylocke's are described as being telekinetic, the fact remains that both can use their powers to create weapons, with which they use to fight. While Psyblade is known for her electromagnetic daggers, Psylocke is more famously known for her telekinetic katana, among other weapons. And if you don't think there is some kind of crazy connection between these two heroes, then just look at them side by side. I mean, it's hard to ignore the visual similarities here. And while Psylocke's origin story is pretty frightening, I mean, so is Cyblade, so ugh. Number 1. Lobo. Lobo actually comes to us from DC, and is stated as being created in an attempt to poke fun at violent and gritty heroes, like Wolverine. What? So there you go. One could argue that he is an even more violent rendition of Logan, as Lobo was also inspired by Marvel's Punisher. He is fond of cigars just like Wolverine and shares some abilities, namely that he is known for being super durable and possesses accelerating healing abilities. He also has a heightened sense of smell, which he often uses as a bounty hunter to help track his bounties. Oddly enough, Image and Marvel have even created parodies of him? A parody of a parody. Wow. Go figure.
And at number 10, Angel of Earth 311. This version of Angel, known as Werner, appears on Earth 311, the Marvel 1602 universe in which all of the Marvel characters exist in the year 1602. Mutants are referred to as witch breed, and the Catholic Church considers them to be devil worshippers hunting them down. Generally, if a witch breed could pass as a human, the Inquisitor Enrique, the alternate of Magneto on this Earth, would let them survive, with the intention of having them join his Brotherhood of those who will inherit the Earth. That is actually the name of his brotherhood. Werner had special garments that his mother had made him that hid his wings, but eventually he was found out and fled. The Inquisition, though, threatened that if he did not return, they would kill his mother. So he obeyed, yet they killed her anyway. He was tied up in chains, set to be burned at the stake. That's where the frightful part of his story ends, luckily, with him eventually being rescued and saved from death by the equivalents of Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Iceman. Speaking of Cyclops, though, in at number 9, Cyclops of Earth 200524. This version of Cyclops is gross rather than scary. Hailing from Earth 200524 from the What Huh comics, this Cyclops has an eye infection, and the results ain't pretty to say the least. That's pretty much his whole shtick. The What Huh comics are parody comics. Like what huh, but like what? They're parody comics, written in a similar vein as the What If stories, except with a much more comedic spin. Earth 200524 appears in the very first issue of Volume 1 of What Huh, and features the likes of stories titled What If the Avengers All Had Beards? What if DC let us do Batman Daredevil as a crossover? And what if Black Panther were actually white? Yeah, I think you guys probably get the vibe of what they were going for. Moving on to number 8, Robert Drake of Earth 51518. This version of Bobby Iceman Drake comes from the remnants of the Age of Apocalypse reality, remnants which were salvaged by God Emperor Doom and made into a part of his battle world. It's referred to as the domain of Apocalypse. Now, Iceman has a gruesome reality. Appearing in Old Man Logan issue 2 back in 2015, this Iceman encountered one of Apocalypse's horsemen, Sabretooth, in the Savage Land, and then was seemingly killed by another horseman, Holocaust, who erupted into atomic fire which engulfed the land and Robert. While his teammates were dead, it was revealed that poor Bobby Drake survived, having become a form of pure moisture, which would then evaporate and reconsolidate into a rainstorm that then poured over the X-Men as they fought Apocalypse. Talk about a jarring existence. He's also a much cruder looking version of the character than we're normally used to. And at 7, Ruins Kitty Pryde. Ruins is one of the most depressing series in the Marvel multiverse. It's tragic as hell, and most of our favorite characters have suffered from terrible fates in this timeline. Ruins takes place on Earth 9591, a place in which all mutants had horrible side effects with their powers. We actually mentioned the version of Professor X on our last part. He became the US president who would then hold mutants in a Texan prison, ordering for them to be experimented on and disfigured for their own good. Kitty Pryde is one of those mutants. She's imprisoned and, in an attempt to escape, uses her phasing powers, but that does not go as planned. Instead, when she's phasing, she gets stuck halfway through a door, causing her to lose 3 feet of her intestines in the process. We never see her die on panel, but it's assumed that, you know, losing a whole 3 out of the 20 feet of intestines that one has inside their body surely wouldn't have the greatest of side effects. There's some science facts for you. We have 20 feet of intestines inside of our bodies. And at number 6, Helverine. Helverine is actually a character who appears on Earth 616. He comes to be after Wolverine's soul was dragged to hell and an unnamed demon decides to take over his body. His whole mission is to ruin everything Wolverine likes in his life, including people. Helverine starts his crusade by going after a pastor that Wolverine had just met prior, covering the pastor's body with insects and stabbing him through the chest, then going over to his church, spraying acid all over it and burning it to the ground while the congregation was inside. Yeah, dark, huh? Luckily, he doesn't get very far when he encounters X-23, who manages to defeat him. Despite that, Helverine goes after the X-Men and almost murders Colossus. He's captured by Mystique, and a ritual is performed to bring Wolverine's soul back to his body. Once Wolverine has returned, he and Helverine duke it out inside of his body, and eventually Jean Grey is able to force the demon out and back to hell. And at 5, Ultimates Nightcrawler. The Ultimates universe, aka Earth 1610, is filled with a whole lot of fascinating but often meaner versions of beloved Marvel characters. Nightcrawler Kurt Wagner definitely falls into that category. Kurt grew up in the Bavarian mountains but was kidnapped for the Weapon X program in his early formative years. He was forced into becoming a mutant agent for them. Once free of the program, he joined up with the X-Men and was generally well liked until, well, he turned out to be a total dick. After he befriended Colossus, the metal mutant came out to him telling Kurt that he was gay. Turns out the Ultimates version of Kurt is a bit of a homophobe and was disgusted by Colossus, telling him that he was dead to him. He eventually grew very lonely and then kidnapped his crush, Dazzler, who at the time was dating Angel, all as a scheme to manipulate her to love him instead. The X-Men had to go after him to rescue Dazzler, and Xavier had to put Kurt into a coma in order to rehabilitate him. And at number 4, The Fallen from Earth 1298. We've got another alternate Warren Worthington III on our list, this time from the Mutant X reality. Now on this Earth, Warren has a very different transformation into one of Apocalypse's horsemen. Rather than being Archangel, he became something referred to as the Fallen. No longer did he have his angelic wings. Instead, his skin became incredibly pale and his wings became bat-like, and he was able to breathe fire. Warren, thanks to this transformation, becomes completely conflicted, eventually giving into all of his dark urges, turning against his allies and becoming completely cruel and merciless. It even got to the point that no one trusted him anymore, friend or foe. Moving on to number 3, Charles Xavier from Earth 20329. This Xavier comes from an Earth that's referred to as the steampunk god world, in which the world is ruled by mutant gods. Which seems pretty neat, until this Charles Xavier comes along and he's totally evil and then takes mental control over all of the mutant gods. Xavier was unsatisfied with the gods who ruled over them, so he began to manipulate Storm. He made the gods slaughter millions of innocent people and cause natural disasters like droughts, which made the people of Earth rise up and fight against them, including the version of this Earth's Magneto named Magnus. Together, Xavier and Magnus created the secret island of Utopia, a haven of science and technology for mortals. At some point he reveals the truth, freeing the gods from his control, but later would be killed by Magnus because of it. And at number 2, Nazi X-Men. Here we have an Earth, Earth 597, in which the X-Men are Nazis, all thanks to the Nazis winning World War II. They subsequently took over the world. The X-Men here are called the Reichmen, and consist of Banshee, Storm, Havoc, Psylocke, and Rogue. It is an Earth that appears in Excalibur Weird War 3, Volume 1, Issue 1 from 1990, where the Nazi universe begins to slip into the 616 universe. The Excalibur team end up having to fight against them along with Herr Xavier, a German version of Professor X who resembles Joseph Mengele, one of the real-life Nazi scientists who was known for his cruel experiments on Jewish prisoners in Holocaust camps. Xavier creates mutants through horrible genetic experiments, including the Reichmen, so fits the bill. And finally, in at number 1, Sublime Beast. This version of Hank McCoy comes from Earth 15104, and he's a drug addict, among other things. From the mind of Grant Morrison, this alternate reality is from the writer's Here Comes Tomorrow story arc, in which we get to see a glimpse of a future timeline version of the X-Men. It's a post-apocalyptic world in which Scott Summers has abandoned his role as the leader of the X-Men, leaving Hank to take over, who ends up creating an army of cloned night crawlers in order to take over the world. Hank's having some major trouble keeping things together, and he became incredibly stressed out, so he starts using a drug for mutants called Kick. Being vulnerable, he becomes the new host for Sublime, and wages a war against humanity. That's where the Nightcrawler clones come in. They're called the Crawlers. And in the process, he ends up completely destroying the Xavier Institute. 150 years later, he's still at it, wanting to completely wipe out other species that were not mutants. He manages to find the Phoenix Egg, and resurrects Jean Grey, aka Phoenix, who, seeing him as Beast rather than Sublime, acts as his minion, exterminating races in his name. He takes some of her DNA and duplicates her powers for himself, which then prompts Jean to remember who she is and purge Sublime from Hank's body.